we live in a world that moves quickly and speaks loudly. It values reaction over reflection, quantity over quality, us over depth. The pressure to stay productive, to stay relevant, to stay ahead, never lets up. But in the middle of all that motion, something essential is quietly forgotten. Real calmness isn't laziness. It's not detachment. It's strength. The kind that stands its ground without shouting. The kind that doesn't need attention to feel worthy. The kind that lets you move through life with intention, not panic. This series is about that quiet strength. Across 12 reflections, we'll explore what it means to live with presence, with patience, with clarity. We'll look at joy that doesn't need applause, gratitude that's not performative, inner peace that doesn't depend on perfect circumstances. Each part is an invitation not to withdraw from life, but to meet it more fully, to slow down just enough to notice what you've been running past, to remember that calm is not something you wait for, it's something you practice. And it's available to you right now where you are. If this kind of content speaks to you, if you're tired of quick fixes and crave something deeper, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, not for algorithms, not for numbers, but to build a quiet space where depth still matters. Because in the end, everything that truly nourishes us moves slower than we think. Some people stay silent out of fear. They shrink in confrontation, avoid conflict, and withdraw from situations not because they are composed, but because they are overwhelmed. Their silence is not serenity, it is suppression. But calmness, as described by Ralph H. Blum, is something entirely different. It is not passive, it is not hesitant. It is the quiet poise that comes from knowing who you are, regardless of what chaos surrounds you. There is a distinct difference between reacting and responding. A reactive person gets swept into every disagreement, every emotion, every injustice. But a calm person, when someone attacks them with words, they don't retaliate impulsively. They anchor themselves in stillness, not because they are weak, but because they are strong enough to let a moment pass without handing over their dignity. Real calmness is a decision. It's not the absence of emotion, but the ability to let emotion flow without letting it take the wheel. It's the difference between slamming a door and quietly walking away, between escalating and exiting, between shouting and choosing silence, not because your voice doesn't matter, but because you value peace more than dominance. People often mistake calmness for indifference, but the truth is to remain calm in a world that rewards loudness is a radical form of resistance. To be calm is not to be detached, it is to be aware. You feel everything, but you don't act on everything. You see clearly, but you don't always speak. You know your value, and you don't need to advertise it. Imagine a negotiation where one person raises their voice, slams the table, demands control. The other sits, still listens, pauses before replying. Who truly holds the power? The one trying to intimidate, or the one who refuses to be rattled? In every conflict, the calmest person in the room becomes the one others turn to, not because they control others, but because they control themselves. This isn't easy. Calmness requires strength that is invisible to the outside world. It's built in small moments when you choose not to reply to a cruel comment, when you walk away from drama instead of feeding it, when you pause for 5 seconds before answering an aggressive question. Each of these moments builds your inner foundation. Calmness is not a single decision. It is a pattern, a practice, a discipline. In professional life, calmness earns respect. Leaders who remain composed under pressure are the ones others trust in crises. A manager who doesn't panic when plans fall apart sends a clear message: we can handle this. In personal relationships, calmness is the difference between deep trust and constant conflict. When your partner is upset and you don't match their energy with more heat, you become the cooling system. You become the space where resolution becomes possible. The same applies internally. When your own thoughts spiral, reminding you of failures, regrets, future anxieties, calmness steps in, not by arguing with those thoughts, but by sitting beside them, by allowing them to pass through without panic, by realizing that a thought is just a thought, not an order you must follow. Calmness is also deeply tied to presence. You cannot be calm if you're always one step ahead of yourself, worrying about what's next, planning 10 moves in advance. True calm happens in the now. It exists in the breath between thoughts. It lives in the moment you realize that you don't need to win every argument, prove every point, or carry every burden alone. But here's the hidden truth. Calmness often looks boring. It doesn't impress in the short term. It doesn't go viral. It doesn't feed the ego. That's why so few choose it. But long term, it's the calm people who remain centered when everyone else is spinning. It's the calm people who are trusted, respected, remembered not for their noise, but for their groundedness. You don't become calm overnight. You become calm by letting go of the need to react. You become calm by choosing not to personalize everything. You become calm by asking, is this worth my energy? And being honest when the answer is no. Calmness is choosing your peace over your pride. Not everyone will understand your calm. Some will think you're weak, too soft, too detached. Let them. That's their lens, not your reality. Real strength doesn't beg to be understood. It moves silently, leaving no damage in its wake. Calmness is clarity. Calmness is restraint. Calmness is power that does not have to prove itself. The Stoics taught that the highest power is self-command. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, urged himself to be like the cliff, against which the waves continually break, but it stands firm and tames the fury of the water around it. For Stoics, calmness was not passive, it was active discipline. It was how one applied logos or reason in moments when the passions threatened to overwhelm. Epictetus reminded his students, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Calmness, then, is the practice of sovereignty over the self. It is the refusal to surrender our clarity to the noise of others. A calm mind is not just a Stoic ideal, it is its embodiment. Gratitude is not a matter of morality. It is not simply the polite habit of saying thank you when someone does something nice. True gratitude is a state of awareness, one that arises not from social norms, but from clarity, and clarity cannot exist inside a chaotic mind. When your mind is overwhelmed, spinning between what happened yesterday and what might go wrong tomorrow, there is no space left to notice what's going right now. You become a collector of burdens, a hoarder of dissatisfaction. You see not the full cup in front of you, but the crack in the glass. A mind constantly driven by comparison, always looking at who has more, who did better, who moved faster, becomes blind to its own abundance. It begins to treat sufficiency as lack and progress as stagnation. Chaos rewrites the narrative of your life, turning blessings into obligations and achievements into pressures. Many people say they want to feel more grateful, but what they really need is to learn how to slow down enough to notice what's already there. Gratitude isn't about forcing optimism, it's about awareness. And awareness only enters when the noise is lowered. This is why chaotic lifestyles make people feel perpetually empty. You can be surrounded by everything you once wished for: relationships, work, stability, and still feel restless, still feel like something is missing. And often, the missing piece isn't something you lack. It's something you've stopped seeing. Gratitude is not a mood you wait for. It is a muscle you strengthen, and the first rep of that practice is silence. Not silence from others, but silence from yourself. Turning down the volume of your inner complaints, your constant striving, your mental noise. What does that silence look like in practice? It looks like pausing before you eat, noticing the warmth of the food. It looks like staring out the window for 5 minutes without scrolling, simply to see what light is doing. It looks like rereading old journal entries and realizing how far you've come without anyone having to tell you so. If your mind is a hurricane of demands and deadlines, there will be no room for gratitude to take root. It will be swept away. Gratitude needs stillness, the way fire needs oxygen. It cannot survive in storms of thought. The real tragedy of chaos is not just that it exhausts you, it blinds you. You become so used to chasing what's next that you forget to recognize what's now. And slowly, you build a habit of looking past the very things that once gave you joy. Gratitude is about proximity. You have to get close enough to life to see its textures. A chaotic mind doesn't have time for texture. It only sees headlines, only measures in achievements, not moments. But real presence doesn't happen in the loud victories. It happens in the quiet scenes. Folding laundry, walking your dog, washing your face at night. These are not meaningless chores. They are the backdrop of meaning itself. And gratitude doesn't require perfection. In fact, it thrives in imperfection. It says, even though this is not exactly how I want it, I'm still glad it's here. That kind of gratitude cannot emerge from a mind trained to only recognize flaw, only point out what's missing. A calm mind, on the other hand, begins to shift that focus. It notices breath, shelter, laughter, quiet safety. And once that noticing becomes habitual, gratitude is no longer a practice, it is a posture. There's also a humility to true gratitude. It admits that much of what you have was not earned alone. It recognizes the hands that held you, the grace that sustained you, the serendipity that brought the right people at the right time. And a chaotic mind rarely pauses long enough to acknowledge this. It's too busy proving, performing, compensating. That's why some of the most grateful people are not the wealthiest or most successful, but the most present. They are not distracted by needing more. They are anchored by knowing what's enough. And knowing what's enough is a wisdom only accessible through stillness. Chaos clouds judgment. Gratitude clarifies it. To cultivate gratitude, you don't need to add anything new to your life. You simply need to subtract noise. The awareness you're chasing is already here waiting beneath the clutter. It's not hidden, it's just muffled. And when gratitude rises genuine, unscripted, it changes your pace. You stop rushing, not because your life has slowed down, but because your perception has. You walk through the same rooms, but you see more. You speak to the same people, but you listen deeper. You wake up in the same body, but you treat it with more care. And that shift, that subtle shift from striving to savoring, it's not external. It's mental hygiene. And it begins by quieting your mind enough to remember. Life isn't something to be fixed, it's something to be felt. Epictetus taught that we should distinguish between what is up to us and what is not. A chaotic mind blurs that boundary, causing us to chase illusions of control, but a calm, disciplined mind sees what is present and honors it. This clarity opens the door to gratitude not as sentiment, but as logic. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself to receive without pride and let go without attachment, knowing that everything we possess is temporary. Gratitude, for the Stoics, wasn't a virtue of politeness. It was a result of seeing reality clearly, and clarity only arrives when the storm within us quiets. In the language of Stoicism, gratitude is what remains when the mind is no longer at war with what is. Joy that depends on recognition is fragile. It lives and dies by applause. It requires someone to notice someone, to praise someone, to validate. And when that recognition doesn't come, or worse, when it's given to someone else, joy crumbles into resentment. But the joy that exists without recognition, that is the rare kind that stays. There is a kind of joy that is quiet. It doesn't need to be shared. It doesn't seek witnesses. It arises when you're alone, reading a page that moves you deeply. When you finish a task, no one will ever see, but you know you did it with integrity. When you laugh out loud at a memory with no one around to ask why. This kind of joy is not loud, but it is unshakable. The more your joy depends on someone else's reaction, the less control you have over your own contentment. External validation is addictive. The more you taste it, the more you chase it. Eventually, your worth begins to hang on likes, compliments, promotions, applause. And the moment those things fade, so does your sense of value. Recognition is fleeting. It belongs to the spotlight, and the spotlight always moves. If you tie your happiness to being seen, you will be constantly repositioning yourself just to stay in its glow. But when your joy is rooted in something no one else can touch, your process, your growth, your values, it can survive even when no one's watching. There is deep power in creating without an audience, in achieving without broadcasting, in living with depth even when others are living wide. The world often rewards noise, but the soul rewards stillness, and real joy lives in that stillness, not in the noise of achievement, but in the presence of alignment. The truth is, many of the most meaningful moments in your life will go unnoticed by the world. You will learn your greatest lesson in silence. You will survive a personal storm no one knew you were weathering. You will make a decision that no one claps for, but that changes everything. If your joy requires recognition, you'll miss these moments. You'll overlook them because no one is watching. But if your joy is rooted within, you'll catch them. You'll feel them, and they will shape you. It's tempting to seek approval, especially in a culture that measures success by visibility. But approval is a moving target. You meet one standard and a new one appears. You impress one group and another demands more. This cycle never ends. And in the process, you lose yourself. You become someone else's version of worthy. The antidote is not withdrawal from life. It's returning to your own values. You ask, what matters to me, even if no one claps for it? You focus on living well, not just performing well. You pay attention to how things feel, not just how they look. You do the work in the dark, and you don't rush to drag it into the light. You trust that its impact will unfold in time, even if no one's watching. There is also a freedom in this approach. When you stop relying on recognition, you become harder to manipulate. You stop adjusting your life to please others. You stop altering your path based on crowd reaction. You become free to explore what brings you alive, even if it's unconventional or misunderstood. And ironically, that's often when the deepest recognition comes, not when you chase it, but when you no longer need it. When your joy is self-sustaining, people feel it. When you're at peace with yourself, you become magnetic, not because you're demanding attention, but because you're not. To cultivate this kind of joy, you must get comfortable with invisibility. You must practice doing things for the sake of the act, not the reward. You must learn to sit in moments of silence and still feel full. This is not resignation, it's refinement. It's joy that doesn't require performance. This kind of joy isn't flashy, but it's resilient. It can survive disappointment. It can outlast rejection. It can thrive in the absence of applause because it was never built on it. It was built on alignment, on living according to your own compass. And in the end, that's the only kind of joy that stays. The Stoics taught that true contentment must be independent of fortune, praise, or reputation. Seneca wrote that a wise man is content with himself, not in arrogance, but in inner sufficiency. Epictetus warned against attaching happiness to things outside our control, including public recognition. To seek praise is to hand over your emotional stability to others. Instead, Stoics practice arete virtue for its own sake. They didn't act well to be seen. They acted well because it aligned with reason and nature. This is the essence of joy, without recognition, to live with excellence, whether the world acknowledges it or not. For the Stoic, the reward is in the doing, not in the applause. Gratitude is not automatic. It doesn't appear just because life is going well. In fact, when life is good, the mind often shifts into entitlement rather than appreciation. We stop noticing the sunrise, the gentle voice of a friend, the comfort of ordinary days. Our attention, if left unchecked, gravitates toward novelty and neglects the familiar. That's why true gratitude must be practiced. It doesn't arise by default. It arrives by design. Left to its own patterns, the mind prefers problems. It scans for what's missing, what's wrong, what's next. It treats rest as laziness, stability, as boredom, sufficiency, as lack. Gratitude resists that drift. It pauses. It reverses the search. Instead of asking, "What don't I have?" it asks, "What am I already holding that I haven't fully felt yet?" Like strength training, gratitude builds through repetition. It requires showing up even when you don't feel like it, especially then. You start by choosing to look closer at your hands, your food, your breath. You notice the ordinary, and in doing so, you discover it's not so ordinary after all. The problem is that many people treat gratitude as a personality trait, something you're born with. But in truth, it's a discipline. It needs practice, attention, and intention. That's why writing a gratitude list at night works. It's not about being positive. It's about refining your perception. Forcing yourself to name 3 things you appreciated each day trains the brain to scan for good, not just danger. Another tool, imagine loss. Not in a fearful, obsessive way, but in a clarifying way. Picture the absence of what you take for granted. What would it feel like to lose your ability to walk, to no longer speak with someone you love, to wake up tomorrow without the freedom to move through the world? These mental exercises are uncomfortable, but they sharpen your attention. They dissolve complacency. They expose the miracle in the mundane. Gratitude is also about slowing down time. When you walk quickly through your day, everything blurs. You finish tasks, check boxes, move forward, but you don't absorb. You don't experience. You consume moments without tasting them. Practicing gratitude is like chewing slowly. It draws flavor from moments that would otherwise be swallowed whole. It also reveals subtle abundance. Not just the obvious forms, money, recognition, success, but the invisible ones. Safety, clean water, a mind capable of reflection, a friend who listens when you ramble, a body that heals without being asked. These are riches too, though we rarely call them that. Practicing gratitude reclassifies them. It moves them from background noise to foreground awareness. But practicing gratitude isn't always pretty. It doesn't mean ignoring grief or sugarcoating pain. Real gratitude can sit beside sadness. It can say, "This hurts, and I'm still thankful for what remains." It is not naive. It's resilient. It doesn't replace sorrow. It holds space for it while still recognizing what's good. The truth is, gratitude deepens when things fall apart, when life is stripped down, when plans fail, when nothing goes according to script. That's when gratitude either collapses or becomes unshakable. And it only becomes unshakable if you've practiced it before. If you've trained yourself to notice, to savor, to remember. Because when crisis hits, your instincts will reach for whatever habits you've built. If those habits are rooted in complaint and criticism, they will multiply. But if they're rooted in presence and perspective, they'll hold you. They'll become the rope you can grip while everything else is unraveling. That's why gratitude must be a habit, not a reaction. It must be embedded in the fabric of how you think, not just how you feel. You build it into your language, I get to, instead of I have to. You build it into your rituals, pausing before meals, reflecting before sleep. You build it into your mindset, shifting from expectation to appreciation. Eventually, this practice reshapes your worldview. You start to look at life not as something owed to you, but as something offered to you. You no longer ask, why don't I have more? You ask, what am I doing with what I've been given? And that shift, small, internal, invisible, is everything. Because gratitude is not an outcome. It's not the result of a perfect life. It's a posture you adopt in the middle of imperfection. It's a choice you repeat again and again until it becomes who you are. The Stoics cultivated gratitude as a byproduct of clarity. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself to appreciate what exists now, not what is lacking. He practiced premeditatio malorum, imagining the loss of what he held dear, not to create fear, but to awaken presence. This aligns with Epictetus's advice. Don't demand that things happen as you wish, but wish that they happen as they do. Gratitude, in Stoic terms, is not a warm emotion, but a clear-eyed acceptance. It's seeing reality as it is and choosing to value it anyway. The disciplined Stoic trains for hardship by practicing appreciation before suffering arises. Gratitude then becomes a form of mental armor, a way of holding life gently, even when it shakes. You can't see clearly through a shaking lens. When the mind is restless, the world becomes distorted. You don't just misinterpret people, you misinterpret reality. You hear attack in neutral tones. You see threats where there are none. You assume judgment where there is indifference. And this distortion doesn't come from outside. It's the result of an internal storm. Calmness is clarity. It is what allows you to perceive not just what's happening, but what it means. Without calmness, you react to surface impressions. With calmness, you pause long enough to see what lies beneath. You stop mistaking urgency for importance. You notice nuance. You detect intention. You listen not just to words, but to what's underneath them. In chaos, the mind defaults to survival mode. It simplifies complex situations into black and white. It demands certainty, rejects ambiguity, and jumps to conclusions. But human life is nuanced, layered, and often paradoxical. To make wise decisions, you need the ability to sit with tension, not run from it. That capacity is born in calm. Think of a surgeon in the middle of a crisis. If their hands shake, if their focus narrows, if their mind floods with fear, they make mistakes. But the experienced surgeon breathes slowly. They steady their vision. They widen their awareness, scanning not just the problem, but the system around it. That calmness doesn't come from emotionlessness. It comes from practiced clarity. The same principle applies to everyday life. In conversations, calmness gives you the space to hear what someone actually means rather than reacting to how they said it. In decision-making, it helps you distinguish between urgency and importance. In relationships, it allows you to see past defensiveness and into pain. Calmness deepens perception because it slows interpretation. Modern life rewards speed, fast responses, fast solutions, fast progress. But depth doesn't happen fast. Depth requires silence, patience, the willingness to linger. Calmness is not just the opposite of chaos, it's the condition for insight. And insight is not intelligence. You can be intelligent but reactive. You can have knowledge but no perspective. Insight arises from the still point where thought settles, from the pause between stimulus and response, from the moment you ask, not, how do I fix this quickly, But what am I not yet seeing? Calmness makes space for that question. It's what keeps you from answering too soon, acting too fast. It protects you from misjudging others because it slows the projection of your fears onto their behavior. Calmness doesn't just sharpen perception, it purifies it. You begin to notice tone, patterns, small inconsistencies that reveal deeper truths. You spot opportunities others miss because they're too busy reacting to the noise. You recognize when something feels off, not because of paranoia, but because you've cultivated a deeper sense of attention, and attention is the root of all accurate perception. In calm, you also begin to notice yourself more clearly. The subtle tension in your jaw, the moment your heart rate shifts, the quiet resentment under your words. This self-perception isn't self-criticism, it's self-awareness. And that awareness leads to wisdom because it lets you intervene before reaction becomes damage. None of this is possible in a restless mind. When you're rushing, when you're multitasking, when you're fixated on control, your inner lens shakes. You start solving problems that don't exist. You miss the actual need beneath the apparent one. You argue with what's not being said. You drift away from reality and start living in interpretation. But perception is only as good as the stillness behind it. Still water reflects. Agitated water distorts. A calm mind is not passive, it's prepared. It receives information cleanly. It registers complexity. It pauses before assuming. It becomes a mirror rather than a megaphone. Calmness doesn't mean you know everything. It means you're not rushing to pretend you do. It makes room for inquiry, and inquiry creates connection. The moment you stop needing to be right, you become available to understand. And understanding is what heals misunderstanding. It's what transforms reaction into response, judgment into curiosity, defense into dialogue. But understanding begins with perception, and perception begins with calm. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are troubled by external things, it is not they that disturb you, but your own judgment of them." Calmness in Stoic philosophy is the precondition for sound judgment. A chaotic mind cannot discern between what is up to us and what is not. The Stoics trained their minds to pause through journaling, reflection, and internal dialogue so they could respond with reason instead of impulse. Calmness was not indulgence, it was responsibility. Epictetus reminded his students that only in a tranquil state could one properly apply reason. In that space between thought and action, the Stoic found their freedom, and from that freedom, they saw the world and themselves more clearly. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is often optional and largely mental. You suffer not just because something painful happens, but because your mind won't let go of it. Because it replays it, reinterprets it, resents it, resists it. The event passes, but your thoughts build scaffolding around it, keeping it alive. In this way, suffering is often less about life and more about your relationship to your own thoughts. A chaotic mind becomes a breeding ground for suffering. It doesn't just register events, it magnifies them. It overthinks, catastrophizes, personalizes. A small slight becomes rejection. A missed message becomes abandonment. A delay becomes failure. The chaos is not in the world, it's in how you interpret it. When your inner world lacks order, everything external becomes a potential threat. You can't trust people's words. You assume negative intent. You brace for impact before anything goes wrong. The result: exhaustion. You're living in a constant state of defense, not because life is attacking you, but because your mind is attacking itself. Mental chaos is subtle. It hides under the appearance of productivity, urgency, or even ambition. But its real symptom is that you're never at rest. You always feel behind, like there's something you should be fixing. Even in quiet moments, the mind doesn't stop. It spins. It clings. It drags the past into the present and injects anxiety into the future. In that state, peace is unreachable. Not because peace isn't available, but because your system won't allow you to access it. You're too entangled in thought loops to touch what's simple and true. The first step to reducing suffering is not to change your circumstances, it's to declutter your mind. And that doesn't require escaping your life. It requires observing your thoughts, questioning them, asking, is this useful? And being honest when the answer is no. Suffering often begins when you identify too closely with your thoughts. You don't just have a fear, you become fear. You don't just notice judgment, you believe it. You fuse with every negative prediction, treating it like prophecy. But thoughts are not truths. They are possibilities. And the chaotic mind forgets that difference. When you learn to pause and observe the mental noise without feeding it, you begin to reclaim space. You begin to realize that the noise is not you. That realization is the beginning of inner freedom. You suffer less, not because your life becomes perfect, but because you stop letting every emotion dictate your story. You learn to sit with discomfort without labeling it as failure. You learn to let a thought pass without building a narrative around it. You learn that pain can visit without becoming your identity. This doesn't mean becoming numb. It means becoming wise. A wise person doesn't deny difficulty, but they don't add layers to it either. They don't multiply suffering by resisting what already is. They meet reality as it comes, and in doing so, reduce the friction between life and mind. One common cause of mental chaos is resistance, wanting things to be different than they are. You want the person to act differently. You want the outcome to reverse. You want to undo what's already done. But this resistance doesn't heal anything. It just keeps the wound open. Acceptance is not passivity. It is the cessation of the internal war. It's the decision to stop arguing with what cannot be changed so you can focus on what can. That shift from resistance to engagement immediately reduces suffering, not because things get easier, but because you stop making them harder. It's also important to understand that chaos thrives in silence. When you keep your pain unspoken, it festers. When you isolate, it echoes. But when you give chaos a voice through journaling, reflection, or honest conversation, it loses some of its grip. You name what's real, and in doing so, you stop being ruled by it. Eventually, the goal is not to eliminate all discomfort. That's impossible. The goal is to stop turning discomfort into identity, to stop telling yourself that anxiety means weakness, that sadness means regression, that confusion means failure. These are just weather patterns. They pass. What stays is your ability to face them without flinching. That capacity to remain centered in the middle of mental noise is not talent. It's trained. It's the result of repeatedly noticing the difference between thought and truth, between story and situation, between what you feel and what is. You'll know your mind is no longer chaotic when the same events don't shake you the same way. When you can hear a hard truth without spiraling. When you can feel uncertainty without needing to fix it right away. That doesn't mean you don't care. It means you've created space between stimulus and story. That space is where peace lives. That space is what transforms pain into wisdom. Epictetus taught that we are disturbed not by events but by the views we take of them. This is the Stoic cornerstone of emotional mastery. A chaotic mind resists, dramatizes and suffers. But the disciplined Stoic mind accepts reality and remains unmoved by false interpretation. Marcus Aurelius urged himself to return to reason whenever emotions surged, writing, "Today I escaped anxiety," or "No, I discarded it because it was within me." The Stoics didn't aim to remove emotion, but to understand it and not be ruled by it. Their clarity came from recognizing that most suffering is mental construction, not external fact. A calm mind, trained in reason and detachment, is the Stoics' antidote to inner chaos. Discontent doesn't always begin with loss. It often begins with habit. The habit of measuring, the habit of comparing, the habit of assuming more is always better. A mind shaped by this habit will struggle to feel satisfied, not because it lacks something essential, but because it's trained to overlook what's already present. The sense of not enough isn't objective, it's manufactured, and it's fed daily by algorithms, conversations, advertising, and performance-driven culture. You're told you should have more money by now, be more accomplished, more attractive, more admired. And if you internalize that messaging without question, you start to feel like a failure in a life that's actually full. Gratitude is the mental discipline that breaks this illusion. It's not a fluffy virtue. It's a sharp corrective lens that disrupts distortion. When you pause and notice what's good without trying to package or improve it, you resist the urge to self-sabotage through dissatisfaction. This doesn't mean rejecting ambition. It means anchoring your pursuit in awareness. When your motivation is rooted in lack, achievement becomes an addiction. No milestone ever feels final. You reach a peak only to feel underwhelmed and already behind again. But when your foundation is gratitude, you grow without losing yourself. The practice begins by identifying where the not enough narrative shows up. Is it in your appearance, your income, your relationships, your time? Notice how often you tell yourself that something is missing. Then ask, is this based on a real need or on a comparison I didn't consent to? Comparison is the thief of perspective. And in its absence, gratitude naturally begins to emerge. The moment you stop measuring your life against someone else's highlight reel, you start seeing its actual content. And often you realize you're already living parts of the life you once desperately wanted. Gratitude reminds you of how far you've come. It reorients your sense of scale. The home you now find ordinary might have once been a dream. The partner you see every day might be someone you used to long for. The skills you consider average might have once felt impossible. Gratitude zooms out the lens and widens your timeline. It reveals progress where the mind sees stagnation. Scarcity is loud. It demands, it nags, it dramatizes. But sufficiency is quiet. It whispers, "You're okay. You have what matters." This voice doesn't always win, but if you listen closely, and often it gets stronger, and that voice becomes essential in a world that constantly monetizes your dissatisfaction. Entire industries rely on you feeling unworthy without their solution. They want you to chase upgrades, reinvent yourself, stay busy, stay hungry. But you can't live well if your worth is always contingent. You'll never stop running. Gratitude is how you stop running. It doesn't mean staying still forever. It means choosing when and why you move. It gives you the option to rest without guilt. To say, "This is enough for now," without fear that you're falling behind. It allows you to sit with what is and to find meaning without constantly seeking more. There's a paradox here. Gratitude doesn't stop you from evolving. It actually fuels deeper growth. Because growth that's built on appreciation is sustainable. It doesn't deplete you. It doesn't require proving yourself to invisible judges. It arises from a desire to give, to share, to refine, not to compete or impress. The most grateful people are not stagnant. They're resilient. They have a foundation strong enough to hold discomfort without panic. They know how to hold joy without hoarding it. And they move through life with an openness that comes from not fearing scarcity. Training your mind in gratitude is not about pretending everything is fine. It's about choosing to see what is good without denying what is hard. It's a dual awareness, pain and beauty side by side. And this balance, once learned, makes you almost immune to cultural noise. You stop being swayed so easily. You stop chasing every signal that says you're not yet enough. Eventually, you begin to define enough on your own terms. You begin to see that wealth can be measured in attention, that beauty can be found in rest, and that success might look like peace, not applause. This clarity changes how you spend your time, how you relate to others, and how you speak to yourself. Gratitude then becomes not just a practice, but an ethic, a way of living that refuses to exploit your own discontent for productivity, a way of reclaiming your sanity in a world designed to make you feel perpetually lacking. And once that shift happens, you'll notice the noise still exists, but it no longer owns you. The Stoics never measured a good life by accumulation. They saw sufficiency as the root of strength. Seneca warned against endless desire, writing, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." Gratitude in Stoicism is not sentimentality. It is reasoned detachment from craving. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself often to look at what he already possessed, as if he might lose it, thereby increasing its value in his eyes. The practice of enough was not resignation, it was liberation. For the Stoic, gratitude wasn't a weakness, it was armor. In cultivating contentment with what is one becomes unshakable by what is not. Being physically present is not the same as being mentally available. You can sit at a dinner table and be miles away. You can hear someone's voice without actually listening. You can complete a task and have no memory of doing it. This disconnect doesn't stem from distraction alone. It stems from a restless mind, and a restless mind is the enemy of presence. Presence is the ability to be fully in the moment without resistance or fragmentation. It means your body, mind, and attention are all in the same place, not scattered across unfinished conversations, imaginary futures, or unresolved anxieties. But this alignment doesn't happen by accident. It's cultivated through calm. When you're calm, you don't rush ahead in thought. You're not bracing for what's next or replaying what just happened. You're able to engage with what is this step, this sound, this breath. And in that engagement, a depth of experience opens up that frantic minds will never touch. Busyness is not the opposite of presence. Anxiousness is. You can be active and still present. But if your activity is laced with mental escape, it becomes mechanical. Life passes by unnoticed, and you begin to feel hollow inside moments that should be meaningful. Calmness slows down perception enough to make the ordinary visible again. You start noticing textures, the steam rising from your cup, the way someone adjusts their posture before speaking, the softness in their eyes when they say something they mean. These details live in the present, and they're only accessible to the calm. Presence requires effort, not forced focus, but surrendered attention. You don't grip the moment, you relax into it. You give up the urge to improve it, name it, narrate it. You simply allow it. This requires trust. Trust that you don't need to multitask your way into safety. Trust that you won't miss out by slowing down. It also requires discipline. Because in a hyper-stimulated world, the pull to scatter is constant. Every notification, every advertisement, every unconscious habit of thought wants to pull you elsewhere. Presence becomes a rebellion against that pull, a silent act of devotion to the here and now. And the irony is, the more present you are, the more time seems to expand. Not literally, of course, but your experience becomes richer, fuller, more layered. 5 minutes of true presence can feel more alive than 5 hours of distracted activity. The moment stretches because you're inhabiting it completely. Without calm, you cannot access that. Your attention will continue to flicker. You'll be half here, half there, never fully anywhere. And over time, that internal split becomes suffering. You begin to feel disconnected from your own life. Your days become blurred, your memories foggy, your relationships strained, not because of absence, but because of non-presence. Relationships thrive on presence. You don't need to have the perfect thing to say. You just need to be there emotionally, mentally, energetically. People feel when you're truly with them. They feel it in your eyes, your silence, your timing. And that feeling builds trust. It repairs more than words ever could. The same is true for solitude. Presence with yourself is how you begin to heal, regulate, and understand what's actually going on beneath the surface. If you're constantly avoiding your own company through noise entertainment or overworking, you lose access to your emotional clarity. Calmness invites you back. In that space, things soften. You feel grief without drowning in it. You hear the subtle wisdom beneath confusion. You recognize that not every mood needs action, and you start discerning what's true from what's just loud. Presence, in its deepest form, makes life feel sacred. Not in a mystical sense, but in a tangible one. You begin to realize that no moment is ever repeated exactly. No breath, no expression, no sky looks the same twice. That awareness doesn't require poetry, it requires calm. Without calm, everything feels replaceable. With calm, everything feels singular. This is why calmness isn't just emotional regulation, it's perceptual liberation. It frees you from the tyranny of elsewhere. It returns you to now not as an obligation, but as an invitation. And when you accept that invitation, you stop missing your life while living it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Confine yourself to the present." This wasn't a casual suggestion, it was an urgent reminder. For the Stoics, presence was the only domain of control. The past is gone. The future is unknown. Only this moment offers action, reflection, and virtue. Calmness, they believed, was the gateway to this state. Without calm, attention fractures. But when the mind is quiet, the Stoic sees clearly what must be done, what can be endured, what can be let go. Epictetus taught that presence wasn't indulgent, it was rational. To be scattered is to be ineffective. To be present is to be free. Calmness then is not comfort. It is command over where and how your life is lived. There's a kind of joy that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't spike adrenaline or demand celebration. It doesn't need to be photographed or posted. It doesn't even always feel exciting, but it lingers. It seeps into your bones. It shows up in the middle of an ordinary afternoon and says without words, "This is enough." Quiet joy is not the opposite of happiness. It is its mature form. It doesn't fade with mood swings or external changes. It remains when the thrill has passed. It remains when no one's watching. And it is available in the most unremarkable places: your morning coffee, a clean kitchen, a sincere conversation, a soft beam of light crossing your floor. Loud joy is often event-based. It depends on outcomes, the job offer, the travel plan, the big win. It's intense, but unstable. When the stimulus ends, so does the feeling. That kind of joy is valid, but if it's your only source, you'll always be chasing. Quiet joy, by contrast, is rooted in awareness, not occasion. It arises from your ability to feel deeply, not just feel big. To cultivate this kind of joy, you have to shift from pursuit to presence. You stop asking, what will make me happy, and begin asking, what already is. You notice texture instead of novelty. You explore depth instead of stimulation. You move from consumption to attention. This joy is slow. It requires patience. Because it's not about extracting value, it's about absorbing it. It's what you feel when you reread a book and understand it more. When you look at someone you've known for years and suddenly see them more clearly. When you sit in silence and feel full. The barrier to quiet joy is not hardship, it's speed. Rushing blinds you. You skip over moments that could nourish you. You miss signals from your own body, your relationships, your surroundings. You treat life like a to-do list instead of a living experience. And in that pace, even joy becomes just another checkbox. But when you slow down, not because you're tired, but because you're choosing to, you start to encounter joy in subtler forms. The satisfaction of a finished task, the warmth of your pet resting nearby, the stillness after a good cry, the moment your mind stops running and there's nothing left but breath. This kind of joy doesn't shout, it hums. And that hum becomes a grounding force. It stabilizes your nervous system. It builds emotional resilience. Because you're no longer dependent on extraordinary circumstances to feel okay. You're fed by the ordinary. And the ordinary is always available no matter how much the rest of your life is in flux. People often overlook quiet joy because it doesn't have drama. It's not memorable in the way big highs are, but its real gift is durability. It's the kind of joy that can coexist with sadness. That doesn't require perfection. That holds space for contradiction. You can be grieving and still feel thankful. You can be uncertain and still feel calm. That is not emotional confusion, it is emotional capacity. This joy is deeply personal. It cannot be transferred or measured. It doesn't rely on others noticing or understanding. That makes it harder to explain but easier to trust. It belongs to you in a way nothing else does. You don't need to perform to earn it. You don't need to prove anything to maintain it. You simply need to return again and again to what is simple and true. The small rituals, the quiet spaces, the breath between thoughts, the life beneath the life you post. This doesn't mean you reject celebration or high moments. It means you don't collapse when they're absent. It means your baseline remains steady. It means your sense of joy expands beyond circumstances. And that expansion changes how you approach every part of life. Work becomes less about reward, more about process. Relationships become less about intensity, more about steadiness. Success becomes less about scale, more about satisfaction. You redefine joy on your own terms, and those terms are sustainable. Eventually, quiet joy becomes your default. You stop waiting for something to happen to feel good. You start noticing what's already happening. You stop chasing and you start receiving. And in that space, even the smallest moments become sacred. The Stoics didn't seek ecstasy. They sought ataraxia, a state of inner calm and unshakable peace. Seneca wrote, "True happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence upon the future." This quiet joy, unlike pleasure, doesn't depend on luck or luxury. It flows from simplicity, clarity, and moderation. Marcus Aurelius found contentment not in triumphs, but in doing his duty well and noticing life's quiet beauty. Epictetus taught that joy lies in doing what is right, not in what is noticed. For the Stoic, joy is not loud celebration, it's silent alignment with nature and virtue. And when the soul is ordered and calm, even the smallest moment becomes enough. Anger is fast. Reactivity is easy. Judgment is impulsive, but character, real character, moves slower. It doesn't erupt. It chooses. And the ability to choose a response rather than deliver a reaction depends on one crucial trait: calmness. Without calmness, you don't respond. You retaliate. You don't listen. You assume. You don't pause. You explode. And in that moment, you might feel powerful, but what you're actually doing is leaking control. You're surrendering your clarity to emotion, your values to ego. No matter how justified the feeling, if it drives you without check, it erodes your dignity. Calmness creates the gap necessary for ethical choice. It buys you seconds that change everything. It allows the higher part of you to catch up with the lower impulse. Without that space, you're not guided by principle. You're governed by mood. And mood is inconsistent. It fluctuates with fatigue, hormones, triggers insecurities. A life built on emotional reflex is a life without moral stability. Compassion too begins with calmness. You cannot hold space for someone else if your own system is flooded. You can't extend patience, understanding, or empathy if you're mentally rehearsing your defense or feeding your outrage. Calmness doesn't mean you suppress your emotion. It means you stop letting it narrate the story before it hears the full plot. When you're calm, you can ask better questions. Not, why is this person attacking me? But what pain are they leaking out? Not, how dare they? But what history shaped this behavior? Calmness doesn't excuse harm, but it helps you interpret it through a clearer lens. So your response reflects your values, not their volatility. Leaders who possess calmness influence more deeply. They're not the loudest in the room, but they become the anchor when others drift. They build cultures of safety, not fear, because their presence says, even in pressure, I will not abandon my clarity. That message builds trust, and trust is what allows people to speak honestly, make mistakes, and grow. Parents too require calmness. A child does not need perfection, but they do need consistency. They need to know that their caregiver's love is not conditional on performance. And that sense of safety is communicated most powerfully in moments of discipline. Yelling may stop a behavior, but calm correction teaches a value. Even self-respect is built on calmness. You lose self-trust every time you explode and regret it, every time you act against your integrity and justify it as stress. But when you remain grounded, even if you're firm, even if you're strong, you reinforce your own authority. You prove to yourself that you're not at the mercy of passing emotions. That inner steadiness becomes your compass. It allows you to make decisions aligned with principle, not pressure. It helps you walk away when needed, speak up when required, hold silence when wise. Calmness doesn't weaken your stance. It makes it precise. It also deepens your ability to forgive. Because forgiveness is not passive, it is the conscious choice to release what would otherwise rot in you. But that choice is impossible when you're emotionally hijacked. Calmness gives you the ground to examine your wound without infecting others with it. It lets you respond without vengeance. At its core, calmness is moral strength. It's what allows you to remain just when others are cruel, kind when others are cold, true when others pretend. It is what keeps your integrity intact in environments that reward performance over principle. But calmness must be practiced. It doesn't appear when you're tested. It reveals whether or not you've trained. Breath work, silence, honest reflection, watching your thoughts without obeying them. These are the disciplines that build the gap between feeling and choice. That gap is not small, it is everything. The Stoics viewed calmness as a prerequisite for virtue. Seneca wrote that no man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself. In pressure, one's values are tested, and only a calm mind can choose to act with justice, courage, and moderation. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly trained his mind to remain composed, so he could lead not as a tyrant but as a servant of reason. Epictetus taught that while we cannot control others, we can always control our response. That response, if it is to be ethical, requires emotional discipline. Calmness to the Stoic is not passivity, it is power in restraint. It is strength made conscious. And it is the root of all principled action. The more chaotic your inner world, the harder it is to feel thankful for anything. Gratitude does not flourish in a mind that is constantly scanning for what's missing. When your thoughts are preoccupied with what should be different, better, faster, more impressive, you are no longer present with what is. You are suspended in a state of imagined scarcity where everything feels slightly insufficient, even the beautiful things. This distortion doesn't just reduce joy, it rewires perception. Your nervous system begins to associate stillness with danger, simplicity with failure, and ordinary moments with inadequacy. You might have a warm home, a loyal friend, a stable routine, but none of it feels satisfying because your internal measurement system has been hijacked by comparison and chronic expectation. Gratitude is not blocked by hardship alone. It's often blocked by mental speed. When your mind is racing, it doesn't linger long enough to appreciate anything. The moment a blessing is recognized, it's already been pushed aside by a new desire, a new comparison, a new standard. And so you become emotionally malnourished despite external abundance. Calmness slows the loop. It allows you to actually feel what you have. It turns quantity into quality. You don't need more moments, you need to be more with the ones you already have. You don't need more blessings, you need deeper awareness of the ones already present. This is why the most thankful people are not the ones with the most to be thankful for, but the ones who are the most mentally still. They've learned how to stop their minds from immediately leaping forward. They stay long enough in the moment to let it sink in. If calmness is absent, even gifts feel like obligations. Even rest feels like laziness. Even success feels like a trap. You can't hold joy if your mind is wired to anticipate its disappearance. Gratitude is not accessible in a state of perpetual alertness. The tragedy of modern life is that we have trained ourselves to always be reaching. We are constantly exposed to new metrics. Someone else's vacation, someone else's relationship, someone else's success. The result is a baseline dissatisfaction that poisons appreciation. It creates an inner climate where nothing feels like enough, even when you're surrounded by plenty. Calmness interrupts that programming. It reminds you that life is not a contest. It's not a ladder to climb, it's a field to stand in. When you stop running, you notice the breeze. You see the light changing. You hear the layers in someone's voice. These small perceptions reintroduce gratitude, not as an idea, but as a felt experience. Gratitude without calm is shallow. It's recited, not realized. It becomes a social performance, a list made out of guilt, not truth. But when your nervous system is settled, you don't have to try to be grateful. You just are. You're not forcing perspective. You're seeing clearly. This kind of gratitude has weight. It anchors you when everything else is uncertain. It keeps you grounded when ambition becomes blind. It brings you back to yourself when you're tempted to chase someone else's life. You begin to notice the value of things that can't be posted or measured. Quiet mornings, trust earned over time, the ability to enjoy your own company. You realize that peace is not the absence of desire, it's the presence of enough. Calmness is what gives you access to that state, not as a destination, but as a recurring return, a recalibration, a coming back to the center when the world and your mind tries to pull you in every direction at once. And in that calm, you begin to see that wanting is not inherently wrong, it's just dangerous when it's unmanaged. Desire without awareness becomes compulsion. But desire anchored in gratitude becomes direction. You can want more and still love where you are, but only if you've trained your mind to slow down enough to hold both at once. The Stoics warned against endless desire because it robbed the soul of peace. Seneca wrote, "If you do not regard what you have as enough, you will never be happy even if you rule the world." Gratitude in Stoicism was not a feeling, it was a disciplined perception of sufficiency. Marcus Aurelius urged himself to appreciate the present before it became memory. Epictetus taught that we should not envy others for what they possess, may be burdens in disguise. The chaotic mind confuses luxury with necessity, but the calm mind trained by reason sees abundance where others see lack. To the Stoic, gratitude is not a reward for success, it is the foundation of tranquility and the safeguard against the tyranny of want. The world doesn't reward slow. It doesn't hand out trophies for stillness. It applauds urgency, idolizes busyness, and celebrates speed as if it were synonymous with progress. You're praised for moving fast, even if you're headed in the wrong direction. You're admired for keeping up, even when it's with people you don't want to be, like chasing things you don't actually want. To choose slowness in that context is not laziness, it's rebellion. It's a quiet defiance of the culture that equates motion with meaning. It takes strength to slow your pace while the world runs past you. It takes clarity to know that more isn't always better, and that what's faster isn't always wiser. Slowness is not about delay, it's about depth. It's not procrastination, it's precision. It allows you to respond instead of react, to digest information before forming conclusions, to sense what your body, your mind, your environment is trying to tell you without missing it in the noise. People rush for many reasons: fear of falling behind, discomfort with silence, addiction to momentum. But in the rush, they lose detail. They make shallow connections. They live in a blur. At some point, they look up and wonder how months disappeared, how conversations became transactional, how life turned grey around the edges. Slowness reverses that erosion. It brings colour back. It reintroduces depth to what had become mechanical. It allows rest to feel earned, not as recovery from burnout, but as a rightful part of rhythm. And rest, when honoured without guilt, doesn't make you less ambitious. It makes you more sustainable. To move slowly is to pay attention, to eat without scrolling, to speak without rehearsing your next line, to walk without rushing the destination, to listen without waiting to reply. These are not aesthetic choices, they are existential ones. They determine whether you truly inhabit your life or merely observe it passing. You will not always be able to slow everything down. Deadlines exist. Emergencies happen. But even in those moments, inner slowness can persist. A slow breath in a tense conversation. A brief pause before making a choice. A single moment of stillness before answering an insult. These micro movements shape your entire character. Slowness invites presence. Presence invites clarity. Clarity invites integrity. And integrity, when practiced consistently, becomes peace. Not peace as in comfort or lack of conflict, but the deep knowing that your pace is your own and you are living by it. But it will take courage. Slowness will be misunderstood. People will project laziness, detachment, arrogance. Let them. You're not slowing down to avoid life. You're slowing down to meet it more directly, to taste what you used to swallow whole, to touch what you used to brush past, to feel the weight and wonder of ordinary things. You are not wasting time when you move slowly, you are witnessing it. And in that witness, a calm, resilient joy begins to grow. A joy not rooted in intensity, but in intimacy with yourself, with others, with the moment as it is. When slowness becomes your practice, you no longer need life to hurry up and deliver happiness. You realize happiness was never late. You were just too fast to see it waiting. So pause. Feel your breath. Listen to your thoughts without jumping to obey them. Let go of timelines that don't belong to you. Sit in your life like it's your favorite seat. You are already in the middle of something beautiful, and the slower you go, the more of it you'll see. The Stoics lived slowly, not by the clock, but by intention. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that rushing was a symptom of forgetting what matters. Nowhere you can go is more peaceful than your own soul, he wrote. For the Stoics, slowness was not weakness, it was sovereignty. It meant living by reason, not reaction. Epictetus taught that we should only act when our judgments are clear, and judgment cannot be clear in haste. Seneca observed that life is long if you know how to use it, and using it well required deliberate pace presence and philosophy. To walk slowly in a frantic world is not to reject life, but to reclaim it. One breath, one step, one clear decision at a time. This series was not built to impress. It was not meant to go viral or demand your attention. It was designed for something quieter, something deeper, a return to the calm, steady truths that hold us together when everything else feels unstable. Across 12 parts, we explored what happens when we slow down, not just our actions, but our thoughts, our judgments, our breath. We look closely at the roots of suffering, not to analyze pain endlessly, but to understand what keeps us tangled in it. Again and again we came back to the same foundation. Calmness is not weakness, it is clarity. We began with the truth that calmness is inner strength, that stillness is not the absence of feeling, but the presence of awareness. We recognized how a chaotic mind distorts everything it touches, and how only through deliberate quiet can we begin to see life clearly. We discussed gratitude not as a positive thinking strategy, but as a radical act of clarity, noticing what already exists, feeling what is already good, and how that noticing becomes impossible when the mind is flooded with wanting, comparing, or rushing. We questioned the need for recognition. We asked what happens when you pursue depth over validation, presence over performance. And we explored joy, not in the form of fireworks, but in the quiet, steady pulse that comes from living in alignment. Throughout it all, one truth remained. The calm mind doesn't escape life. It meets it fully. It doesn't resist discomfort. It holds it wisely. And from that still center, better choices arise. More compassionate relationships form. Clearer values emerge. In a fast world, choosing slowness is an act of courage. Choosing silence over reaction, stillness over spectacle, gratitude over grasping. These are not just habits. They are philosophies, and in many ways they are a form of quiet rebellion. This series is not the end. It is a framework to return to, a reminder you can revisit any time life feels loud again, any time your clarity dims, any time you need to come home to yourself. So take what resonated, let the rest go, and above all remember you are not behind. You are not late. You are not broken. You are just invited again and again to come back to what is simple, what is real, what is enough. Let the world keep spinning. You know how to be still.